Security assessment and authorization. Let's separate it out. Security assessment. It's an ongoing process. It is less formal than an audit, but it is a continuous process that goes to increase the maturity and the evidence and the around various controls, various processes, or around an overall system that you're trying to develop. Assessments are points in time, but they're also couched with the overall flow of a development process, if you will. Security authorization is a point in time, but also within the process. We have security authorization definitely at the end of an overall development process so as to authorize a system for operation. But we have many, we'll see in the detail of ITSG 33, we have many authorization gates throughout the, what we call a gated information system development process. That follows in ITSG 33 more of a waterfall process, and we'll go through all of these things as foundational to what the next couple of days are going to offer. So definitely, and this is one of the most important concepts to understand, this is a compliance regime, meaning that we have to first identify what our requirements are, and at the end validate and demonstrate, and that's why we're going to talk about evidence collection. You need to be able to demonstrate that you are compliant to the various set of requirements that were at the beginning. So many times do I get into a project and we get into security assessment, sometimes too late. And so what are the requirements? Yeah. So definitely we need to, and much of our processes in government are anchored in the level of maturity of our organization. And I'm not going to get into the capability maturity modeling, but let's understand that security assessment and authorization is a rigor intensive process, different degrees of rigor, of course, and then we'll walk through that in our practical view of what SANA does. But we see that this is a process that requires some level of process control and of rigor and of constraints. This is the way we deploy. There's some flexibility, but this is the way. So it's a compliance regime, and we need to understand, as an organization, we need to develop that process and anchor that process into some level of rigor. Let's step back a little bit. Where does SANA fit? SANA fit obviously within our policy and environment, and with the policy reset that happened in July 2019, the PGS, the Policy on Government Security, the DSM, which is not the DSM, it used to be the Directive on Departmental Security Management. Now it's a DSM and the DIM. We no longer have a standard, which used to be the Management of Information Technology Standard, which sat in between our policies, our directives, and our guidance. So the kind of the information that used to be in our standards somehow got elevated, if you will, into control objectives that are found in our policy and our guidance, in our directive. All of that, some of the renewal, one of the very, very important renewal in our policy environment is the fact that we no longer have a DSO, we have now a CSO. This is a chief security officer. That chief now sits at the chief table. I remember when I used to work at D&D for a certain time, the DSO was a lieutenant colonel who could not sit and be able to be authoritative at the C table. So, the PGS is recognizing, and this environment is recognizing the need for anchoring our policy, our security programs into an individual that is going to sit at the C table, the CSO. And we have a new hierarchy that's defined in these documents. I really invite you, all of the people on the call, to spend a little time on the PGS and the DSM. I'm going to point out those elements with respect to SANA that are relevant for here. So in our directive on security management, the Appendix B, and again, I'll invite you to walk through that to see how the structure works. But Appendix B deals a lot with the control objectives around our family of IT security controls, if you will. And one of those around the management of our security program is around IT security assessment and authorization, which indicates that the CSO and the organization that he or she oversees is responsible for implementing this security assessment authorization process, which assesses security controls that are effective not just when you're designing or at the end, but throughout operation, so as to and document risk mitigation measures. So we'll see that we'll need to understand what controls protect us or mitigate us against certain threats and so on. There'll be a traceability matrix that is going to be required for this. We will at one point authorize information system with a certain level of risk that's accepted by the organization. I call that responsibilizing our executives, if you will. Definitely document the security assessment authorization decisions and continue to keep a vigil over our operation to maintain the authorization security status at the time of authorization. So we're going to go through various elements of the process that surrounds these activities. Of course, also within that Annex B, Appendix B of the DSM, security in IT project management is identified as a responsibility for the CSO in that organization to integrate security considerations in all phases of IT project management. This isn't new. Even the documentation, the guidance document that we had before ITSG 33 still talked about the idea of integrating security in all of the phases of the project lifecycle. We have been touch and go, if you will, on implementing this, and this is what a little bit what John was saying at the beginning, and something that I recognize as well. There is a growth opportunity in government around the anchoring and the rigorizing of some of these concepts. I'm French. I'm allowed to make up words. All right. So where does this guidance come from? This guidance, and I could go into the Orange Book and the CTCPEC and the common criteria. There's decades of understanding of what are security controls, of how to deploy them, how to implement them in an overall compendium of different levels of threat and of virulence of our threat environments. And so there's all kinds of guidance out there. And back in, early 2010-ish, some of the efforts around the common criteria and stuff, we're seeing that we needed to provide a shopping list of security controls for our engineers, for our system developers, as opposed to simply go and fetch products that have been independently evaluated. So we needed a catalog and a process, and this is what happened in the States in around those times, and SP 800-53A, which is the precursor, if you will, to ITSG 33. And there's been a newer release of ITSG 33 that saw some of the stuff that happened here in Canada that was integrated into the newer versions of 800-53. So the US and Canada are somewhat working separately. The US environment isn't completely the same as ours, but the idea of having security controls for different levels of threat and of virulence of the threat environment is really at the basis of this. For us in Canada, for ITSG 33, which was developed in 2012 but updated in 2014, we have two large sections to ITSG 33. to this guidance around SANA. We have guidance around how to create and how to mature our security organization, so the IT security functions within a department. And we have another section, the appendix to that deals with all of the system design lifecycle activities and the assessment activities and the authorization activities throughout a secure design system design lifecycle. So it's a process intensive with activities and description. Be doing what are the inputs, what are the outputs. Very, 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 very thorough ad infinitum in a sense. And this is why this is a guidance document. This is not to be implemented as is. You cannot. There's all kinds of sections of this that are guidance, that are interesting, that your organization may not be at the level of maturity to be able to absorb some of this stuff. So, you need to look and you need to be able to walk through this stuff. So I kind of pointed to these. So departmental activities, let me go through this slide here. That kind of helps. Of course, if you've looked at ITSG 3.3, I also teach the CSE courses on ITSG 3.3. And of course, we spend a lot of time with this graph, with this diagram. And this diagram is demonstrating those two annexes of ITSG3. The first one, which deals with the departmental IT security function. And in this activity, this is all of the preparation of understanding what is the business of the department. Because one of the most important concepts of ITSG 3.3 is that we are not simply looking at systems anymore. We used to do a statement of sensitivity around our system when our system came in. We were very system myopic. With ITSG 3.3, before we talk about systems, the first appendix, the first annex doesn't deal with systems. It deals with the organization. How is my organization set up? How is my central IT security organization going to help the organization systems and implement systems? How am I going to help them understand the business of the organization and what they should be looking for and what is superfluous and not important? So this is what this Annex 1 does. We start by defining the business of the organization by categorizing all of the business activities. We'll walk through that. Defining our security control needs and defining security control profiles. I'll walk through that in a few minutes. These generic security control profiles basically define buckets of requirement, if you will, that as a system developer, I can select, I'm more this one, no, I'm closer to this, and I tailor at that point that security control profile to my needs. We'll go through that. I'm introducing some of the concepts that we're going to delve deeper in the next few minutes, and of course in the next couple of days. So as a generic development for this IT security function will be the development of those departmental security control profile and also threat assessment reports. We have generic threat assessment reports in the Canadian government. We will, the security function needs to adapt those to the business of this department. Maybe even the business of this division inside the department, the business of this division. For example, when I was at National Defense doing the security for the command and control system that we had for our soldiers in Afghanistan, obviously there were many different domains within this overall highly classified environment. And each one of those harbored or were subjected to different threat. And therefore we had produce and consume different threat reports. But if I were to develop a system without the input of all those threat assessment reports, I'm a little floundering in the wind, figuring out what. And this is where many of our certification accreditation, the precursor to SANA, certification accreditation activities were failing, is that our systems were not benefiting from a lot of intelligence from our security organization in the department to guide the work of our security. And this is what ITSG 33 is definitely doing with Annex 1. And Annex 2 is the system design lifecycle, initiation, development, acquisition. I like this other slide better. This is in Annex 2. This is again the whoops, backspace JF. This is again the system design lifecycle initiation, development, acquisition, but in a waterfall where we have a subdivision of our different phases, and these are activities in light. In light brown are assessment activities, and in dark brown are authorization activities as described here. So as a project, anybody that's worked in project management sees this and goes, well, yeah, system design lifecycle or development process. It's simple. The idea, though, is that this is a secure system design lifecycle. It integrates, it implements many security activities where they are required. When we are doing the project plan, we need to integrate the activities of this system implementation process, secure implementation, into the project plan. When we're doing requirements analysis, we will define a business need for security and tailor security controls. So this is a huge process. And you can think of, yeah, but my project is a 3-month project and we have like 40K. There's no way we're doing so. This tailoring, and we'll talk about tailoring later, tailoring of the security controls certainly for the particular set of confidentiality, integrity, and availability requirements for my system, but definitely also for the scale and the complexity of my overall project, we will also need to tailor this overall system design lifecycle to the specific needs of the system and of this environment. So these are the 17 control families that are in ITSG 33. And as I say when I teach the ITSG 33 course at CSE, I say if you are in system development, in security assessment, this is your new vocabulary. You need to speak this vocabulary, 900-ish controls. And yes, it is tedious, it is, but it is required for you to become knowledgeable and be able to understand and describe what is meant by each of the controls and enhancements. This is not a task for everyone, but this is a task for someone within the multidisciplinary team, both at the security function of the organization and inside of project and inside of business divisions, if you will. So like I said, this is a compliance regime. We need to have a priori requirements, so business need for security, security controls, level of acceptable, different requirements that we need to define at requirements analysis before we get into development. We will need to demonstrate compliance. So we will, as you design, this is probably the biggest issue that I feel, that I sense. During design, engineers, developers, integrators need to have in their mind, when I set up this security control, what do I elect to be able to demonstrate that this has been implemented? Sometimes it's one piece, sometimes it's 17 pieces, sometimes one control is implemented in 5 or 6 different components of my design, and so on. So this is a tedious and complete activities, again, that needs to be modulated with the level of complexity and scale of your project, and of course the abilities within and the resources that you have. So in ITSG 33, this Annex 2 is a secure system design lifecycle. It's called the Information System Security Implementation Process. There's all kinds of other system security design lifecycle. Build security in, I put the link in OWASP. There are many organizations that have put in the intelligence into all the rigor of a system development process. And there's all kinds of help. I can say I would always want more help around tailoring and around guidance, because that's the secret sauce of this entire process. How am I going to decide whether this control really applies to my system? Well, this can be simple. For example, I am at Indigenous Services Canada, and for one of the systems we're developing, there's no wireless in the system. So everything that deals with wireless, chuck, tailored out. Some of that tailoring is simple. Some of that tailoring is a little more complicated. And of course, within ITSG 33, we describe our security control profile according to the 3 dimensions: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And the the point that we're going to see is that a PBMM, so protected B, medium integrity, medium availability, a PBMM profile for Indigenous Service Canada isn't the same as a PBMM profile for national defense, for example. I forgive I'll blow up this diagram in a second. I just want to show you that security controls profiles are the 3 dimensions, but each security control profile is defined by a context description. The business context for Indigenous Services Canada is very different than the business context for Heritage or for D&D or CRA. But that business context defines for, let's say, a division at ISC, what are the confidentiality, integrity, and availability requirements around the activities for what that control profile is meant for. And then technical context and also. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. So
Yeah, we
so
can.
the sorry, I
Yeah.
think I pushed on my button. So the context information is where a designer and an engineer, a developer will go and look to select which control profile is the closest to the business activities that is intended for this system. But if we step back again in Annex 1, in that first annex where we describe what the organization is, the security organization is developing as tools to help our system developers, the security function for ISC, we looked at what are the various control profiles that are relevant to the business of Indigenous Services Canada. So for us, for Indigenous Services Canada, there were systems that were protected a low integrity, low availability. So we have to create a control profile that was relevant to that. We have several that are protected B, medium, medium. We have to develop also one that is protected B, medium, high availability. We have secret MM, and we also are collecting and developing control profiles that are more specific to the cloud. For example, and CSC and the Treasury Board has provided all kinds of help, and I suspect that several of my colleagues will point to that and identify some of those resources for you. But there are reductions, and every developer goes, 400 controls, that's too many. The desire to reduce the number of controls makes sense. It's I understand. The idea though is that the identification of the closest control profile to what your needs are is that first step for a system. But definitely when you get into the cloud, some of the controls are assigned to the cloud, some of the controls need to be assigned to the department, and some are shared, as in this diagram. Definitely, if you choose a SaaS level of cloud model, definitely there's a lot less for the department to have to account for. So the implementation of a SaaS cloud project for the department, it's more of a description of the configuration of the cloud service, because we're going to connect to it through our internet or whatever services we have. And when we get into platform as a service, there's a little more for the organization. When we get into infrastructure as a service, there's even more of what the organization needs to develop in terms of the controls inside the organization. This separation is also something that was done. For example, in here, for ISC, we've developed for our protected B medium SaaS information system control profile. Some controls are assigned to the department, some to the cloud provider, and some to both. And we walk through that as in our requirement traceability matrix. So where do you start? You start by defining and understanding the business of your organization, and that's called categorization of your business activities. This is a program level departmental plan for ISC at a very high level. Describes the program and sub-program and sub-sub. Each one of those needs to be categorized. What are the confidentiality, integrity, availability requirements for each one of those programs? That will tell you at that point what are the types of security controls that you're going to need for your organization. At ISC, the dependence on a classified level of control profile much less important than the protected B medium environment, where a lot of the stuff that we do at ISC fits. So understanding the scope of the business activities, the strategies, you can decide to categorize your entire set of business activities. In another department that I was working with, we looked at a particular division of business activities that was a priority as opposed to the overall organization. This is all to be defined, to be identified. So once you have categorized your business, the organization needs to deploy those control profiles that are representative of the organization, like we did for ISC. And you define the security needs and the context, business, technical, and threat context for these environments. A system at that point, then once all of your activities are categorized, a system and project looks at each one of the system of the business activities that the system will support. And at that point, instead of looking at the system in myopia, you look at what business activity it supports, and that system therefore needs to meet the high watermark of all of the business activities that are supported by the system. We have ITHD 3 performs various guidance around that process. It's pretty straightforward. The point then at that point becomes around selecting that control profile that is closest to the needs of my business, and then doing the tailoring. Various tailoring is required. First of all, obviously, at this point here, when we're doing the integration into the project plan, we are tailoring this entire process, for a project that is a charge board submission at 100 million, we're doing the whole thing. For a project that's 3 months with 20K, we're probably going to be very, very selective and somehow tailor the process for that less complex system. The tailoring also, we need to validate the threats that we're going to protect against. For example, if we take I don't work at CRA, but I can use the example. CRA, when they developed their system, the overall environment was representative of the type of services they offered on the CRA website. But then when by logging on you could get $2,000, the overall threat environment for that this website was exposed to was very different, because you could get at $2,000 very simply. The threat environment changed. The threats that were selected as not relevant to this system now needed to be relevant, because now criminal organization were potentially attacking that website, and therefore a vigil over the threat environment meant that we have threats that are acting. We need to increase our security controls to mitigate those threats. You must tailor, as I say, the activities. How do you eliminate certain activities, combine deliverables? All of this goes through the experience that your analysts have at doing this. There isn't, as I can say, a cheat sheet to do this. It's time, and 6 months later you go, oh, this project looks a lot like that project we did, and you're able to follow through that. But the tailoring is really the secret sauce. And this goes to the types of tailoring around the various process, but also tailoring of the controls themselves to make sure that they are relevant to the the department, and eventually the tailoring around the system for development. Eventually, we need to be able to authorize this system. After having gone through all these processes, we need to authorize, and this authorization is a point in time, but must be maintained. And the authority to operate most of the time deals with certain conditions. And each of the gates during development, there may be conditions. Yes, you can go into development, but you need to mop up this deliverable that wasn't done. And same thing at ATO. I have never seen a system being authorized without certain conditions. The difficulty is that often once a system is authorized, the PMO, the project disbands, and who is in charge of collecting those conditions and making sure that those are mopped up in the future? That continues to be, for me, an area of growth. And obviously, an area of growth for all of government is this continuous authorization, this ability to validate that my controls are operating throughout and in time. And all of this, in terms of practical considerations, is very much couched in the security culture of the organization. If you don't have a champion that is able to, at the C table, be able to say to the project management folks, there has to be rigor in your process. You can't say, well, this is what I created and deal with it. There has to be a desire for the corporate culture to include and incorporate more rigor into this. What level of rigor? Depending on, of course, the complexity of the system. So stakeholders, champions, the knowledge of your resources, certainly, the maturity of your organization, and if there's existence of resistance, I mean, there's probably all kinds of personality considerations around how difficult it may be to implement some of this. So this was a bit of rapid fire kind of foundational information around SANA, so as to anchor a few of the things that we're going to talk for the next couple of days.
Outstanding. Thank you very much, JF. We definitely have time for a few questions. John, are there some questions in the chat that you'd like to
share? There's a little bit of a conversation inheriting from different organizations. So JF, you mentioned a lot of reuse and the ability to tailor things. You know, what is your experience in reusing materials, and how do you decide whether or not there's enough there to reuse or worthwhile to reuse?
Yeah. I can say that one of my biggest pet peeves is the restraint or the barriers around sharing of information inside of government. Two different departments looking at exactly the same cloud service provider for exactly the same service. One department has done the validation of the cloud service provider's environment at a PBMM level. They don't want to share the details to the other department. That is the most cumbersome. I mean, reinventing the wheel multiple times. Now, it doesn't mean that what I would get from this organization is necessarily, meeting exactly my needs. But the point, again, those three description of the context around which a control profile was created, the depth of the process that was used for another department doing the validation of their environment, and understand that all of this is practical. None of this is theory. All of this is having to tailor and massage this process, and risks. You always end up with risk and your threat risk assessments, where this control cannot be implemented. What's the impact of that? Pointy threat risk assessments are really, and I could go on and on. There's all kinds of practical considerations around the performance of security assessment authorization that goes with time, that goes with experience.
Another question here about rigor becoming an interesting discussion. Risk has no units. How do you measure rigor?
So if you take the harmonized threat risk assessment course, the HTRA, or if you just look at threat risk assessment or threat risk management as a whole, there's different methods. You can do quantitative risk assessment, which are around monies and that kind of stuff. So financial organization. We're more a qualitative type of risk assessment and risk management process. Everything is subjective. It's high, medium, lows. As an analyst, and when I teach these courses, and this is what this tailoring concept is, every decision that is made around removing of this control or adding of this control, or is this relevant or is not relevant, needs to be documented. This is a documentation heavy activity. Of course, I got a 30K project. There's going to be a lot less documentation than for a $100 million project. That's a Treasury Board submission. And where is the cutoff? I can say that the cutoff at ISC is different than the cutoff that I had when I was at Global Affairs. Every department has an ability, and each department has to develop those skills inside of that security, that IT security function, so as to support the project. And we're all growing organically, little by little, hopefully as fast as we can. And hopefully these tutorials and these sessions are aiming to distribute that knowledge out there.
John, we have time for another question, I think, or two. Did we lose John?
Hold on, sorry.
I think John might be having some bandwidth issues.
Bandwidth issues. I was having some earlier, I think.
All
right. If there's
there's a question, JF.
Okay.
Pete Hillier had a question that she posed to on top of a question Steve did about splitting the responsibility for cloud. Splitting the responsibility for controls in the cloud, isolating the demarcation and tailoring being key. And
that it is definitely key. It is, and I can say that even in a matter of, let's say, 5-6 months, the ability for the analysts at ISC to do this has increased incredibly, because over time and over the use and some discussions, the understanding of how to chop up the elephant. This experience works, but it is experience. I can't say that I have a cheat sheet. That it is looking at the scale of the project and what is the separation of what is for the cloud provider and for the department's landing zone is also an effort of tailoring.
Good point. Michael Disley has shared that he hears frequently from business owners they don't need to do S&E because the cloud platform's already been certified by TBS. They resist the need to assess their own business, such as the ACCP families.
And
Thoughts?
this is thank you, Kelly, and thank you, whoever asked this question, because that's exactly the point of these next 3 days, of the next couple of days, is the fact that it is not possible. It is not going to be possible for a government organization to, quote, forgive the expression, walk into the shorts of the cloud service provider to the degree that our cloud, control profile demands. So that tailoring is basically the point. You're not going to be able to, you may decide that you want to pay for this, to be able to every week be able to go and at a moment's notice go and walk into your cloud service provider and validate the environment that you have. No, it's not possible for you to do that. If you want to do that, they're going to charge you an arm and a leg. So there's a certain degree of trustworthiness and of independent evaluation that you can rely on. So a SOC 2 report. And all of my colleagues are going to talk about this for the some of the external validation of the rigor and of the maturity of that cloud provider. At a certain point, it's all risk management. By selecting a cloud provider, you are transferring a huge amount of your risk for the implementation of whatever you're contracting them with. But the point is that separation and how you get to trust a cloud service provider, that is really the point of how it was done, and what are you able to rely on from another organization. So a SOC 2 from an AICPA, and my colleagues are going to talk about this. How do you evaluate a cloud provider? And this is what is the point, and the idea that no, you are not going to be able to go through 400 controls at your cloud service provider to validate all. How are you going to? And this is what my colleagues are going to be delving into for the next couple of days. It's a very pertinent question. Thank you.
They are. I'm not sure if John's back with us.
I think so, but
yeah, we hear you now.
I'm here.
There we go.
Kids are back and they're online, so that tends to happen.
Yeah.
So I think we have time for one more question, John, if you've gone through the list and picked a.
Yeah, I think this one, the output of the SNA process appears to be document heavy. How do you maintain compliance over the longer term when the team's initiatives are disbanded? I think that one's a good one.
Yeah. Knowledge management systems, if you will. So lessons learned. How and if you look at an environment that is very, very, very well process controlled, talk about a help desk environment. The rigor of the process, the ability to measure metrics around the amount of time that it takes for this type of call, and when they enter, when they solve a problem, they go into this knowledge management system to describe where, in fact, and how they solve this. This is rigor. This is process control. This is understanding, characterizing your processes, understanding how you're going to improve and improve and improve the effectiveness of those processes. This is where we are, guys and girls. We have not benefited in IT security and security as a whole from that rigor demonstratability effort. We haven't had to definitely demonstrate our worth to the organization. That's been one of our biggest problems. Now we're doing it. We have to do it, but we need to reorient the organization to produce these systems, produce the intelligence and the information that we need at the right time. And all of this is trying to grow the organization organically. This group has to be able to do their part and that part and that part, so that we're there. But the growth of the organization and the selection of what is necessary and what is not, that's the secret sauce. That's the tailoring.
All right. John, unless you have any other really pressing questions you want to add, I'd like to move on to the next speaker.
Let's move on, Kelly. Thank you.
Okay.
Lovely. So, I will relinquish control.
All right. And we've got a list of the questions, and we'll take a look. And if there's any that we don't think got answered today or in the others, we'll see if we can share that with the group. So we actually split the next topic between today and tomorrow. So we've got two speakers. One today is going to join us from Oracle, and then his colleague tomorrow to finish up the topic. And it's going to be a combination of hyperscale cloud concepts today and compliance and responsibility within the cloud tomorrow. So I'd like to introduce Mark Cormachant. Mark, are you on? There we go. He's sharing his slides. So Mark, I'm going to let you give us a brief introduction of how wonderful you are and take it from there. Mark, are you speaking on mute?
Hey, Kelly, can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Okay, awesome. Let me throw some video on here too. There we go. So first off, thanks to AFCEA for allowing us to participate in this event. My colleague Jonathan Hay will complement this session tomorrow morning. My name is Mark Kamishak. I'm Director of Product Management for our Oracle Cloud Infrastructure for Public Sector for North America. I work a lot with our Canadian public sector team and look forward to kind of dovetailing off of what JF talked about, which I thought was a great foundation and a launch point for how SA&A and Hyperscale Cloud actually comes together. So without further ado, let's get started. I've been with Oracle for a little over 15 years, and I've been in OCI for over 2.5 years working on developing cloud for governments. Here we go. So quick agenda. I've got about 20 minutes or so to talk about some basic cloud hyperscale topics, some fundamental around cloud computing, automation, that is really what's driving the scale of what cloud is about. Different service models. I'm going to talk about kind of a little bit more in depth of what JF talked about in terms of PaaS, SaaS, and infrastructure. And then, of course, what if you do it all yourself, roll your own, how that applies, some basic cloud terminology, and then CapEx and OpEx, a little bit more around the costing of cloud and how you benefit from that. So if you look at cloud computing, right, and I kind of highlighted some words in here, and it really kind of addresses where hyperscale computing is about in cloud, right? If you look at on-demand self-service, so automatically, without the need of administrators or someone else, that you can provision cloud resources, whether it's infrastructure or PaaS services. Those are things that you do on demand, and the automation and tooling behind that allows that to scale for any number of clients from a cloud service provider or CSP. It's that tooling that allows you to bring those resources collectively together in a platform and then deploy your applications on. One of the other tenets around cloud is network. This network is for both not only the internet access of your application, but also the backbone of the network itself between a cloud service provider regions. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. But these are standardized connectivity requirements that, whether it's direct connects, whether it's over the internet, whether it's VPN, IPsec, connections, those are the requirements that are ubiquitous in supporting of cloud and availability. The idea around resource pooling. So here's where you have this concept of multi-tenant models or multi-tenant environments where you get a piece of a compute platform or storage or other pooling of resources that can be shared amongst consumers. The important part of that is that this resource pooling, and we'll get a little bit more into this in a bit, is how to scale, both scale in and out or up and down with this in this resource pooling without the need of anyone engaging. So you have the ability of auto scaling. You have these resources that have been put into the cloud CSP for you to take advantage of as part of your overall platform for scalability. And then, of course, elasticity. So this is the ability to provision and release resources. You can turn things on, turn things off. You can see where if you're over provisioned, you can then reduce that footprint for your cloud platform. And that then saves you cost across the board. And then a measured service. So the idea here is that you're able to monitor, control, and report, understanding about your consumption, what's being used, and what's available within the cloud service provider's platform. So what's this idea around automation? So it kind of starts first, if you look at regions, and JF talked a lot about this idea around physical security. And if you look at it from a CSP, tens of regions around the globe that you'd never be able to audit in time. So this idea around the physical security, this is something that cloud service providers have been very good at in terms of deploying regions throughout the globe. This is a standardized process. They know exactly the footprint that they're looking for. They're looking for for ping power pipe, if you like. So this standardization also helps in your SA&A process. We have standardized servers and supply chain that drives what goes into these regions. Network, as we talked about, whether it's the network backbone between regions and providing connectivity. There's the pure internet backbone to your application itself. And then, of course, there's storage, right? And that storage scales whether it's within region or between regions of backing up and having high availability. This allows basically CSPs to really be able to scale these environments rapidly. The other thing that we do, and as a CSP, is the idea around ConMon, right, or continuous monitoring. These are areas by which the cloud service provider on a regular basis, whether it's through SOC or ISO, but also through the ability to patch and the underlying control, the planes that are driven within cloud. And so there's, as these servers deploy within regions, there's these different concepts called planes, or control plane, data plane, network plane, and user plane. These are all driven as a means by which we do management, we do automation, we do deployments, and it's spread across different types of infrastructure that is deployed within a region. The user plane itself should be isolated from all other planes. That way there's what we call no-look environments by which your user data stays within the user plane. The network plane and data plane and control plane. Control plane is what is managed by, what is used to manage these various regions. And these, they're like lights out operations. If you think about these regions and data centers, these are completely lights out operation, other than if you're needing to roll in more servers or having actually kind of physical connections that need to happen. But fundamentally, with the backbone and the control plane coupled together, allows the entire process to be done remotely. And then we deploy and we build out services on top of the control planes and various planes with on the servers. And so you have basic services as infrastructure as a service, compute, storage, network, virtual software-defined networks, if you like, where you get to create your own virtualized network within the overall backbone or plane, network plane that is provided by PaaS services, where you up level into things like integration or database or other services that are a little higher level than infrastructure, but rely on infrastructure. And that's kind of where that marriage of bringing controls into the infrastructure and leveraging some of those controls that those PaaS services use. And then, as JF talked about, there's the SaaS service, which is ultimately a user application that is fully managed, fully controlled, and deployed by the CSP. And then finally, there's a lot of this automation that drives, because how could we do this across multiple regions around the globe? Well, there's ideas of how we have to upgrade and automate things like patching. How do we update network infrastructure? How do we patch infrastructure? How do we patch the control planes? That all happens through automation, using scripts and Terraform and Ansible and other back-end servers and systems. We can then offer new services rapidly. If you think about the cloud versus typical on-prem applications, on the on-prem, you acquired product, you had to install it, you had to upgrade it and do it all on your own. The Cloud CSP now can offer new services very rapidly and push those services out to all the regions, sometimes within a day. In fact, many CSPs will offer a new service and it'll be offered globally as part of the rollout within the CSP. And then, of course, upgrades. Nothing stays the same. We need to upgrade, add new feature functions. Those upgrades and automation continually get pushed out on a regular basis. You've heard of DevSecOps. Well, cloud service providers use those similar types of concepts of pushing these upgrades and pushing these new features and functions out into the regions. So if you look at the various service models, right, you've got, you do it all. You manage it on the left, it's traditional IT. You're responsible from everything all the way up to the application. As you move towards infrastructure, the shared responsibility model actually goes for how the CSP then becomes responsible for virtualization, server storage, networking, all those infrastructure components that you leverage and you are able to consume as part of your environment. you still have responsibility for the operating system and above the line, if you like, from the virtualization layer. But the CSP and through automation is able to rapidly patch those things underneath the infrastructure and fundamentally never really impacting your environment. There's the idea around platform as a service. So this is where the CSP now has a greater delivery of updating and patching and bringing the services at a new level through automation. And this helps drive this across all the regions. And then finally, software as a service, where you're providing applications and data within the environment. It is, if you like, they call them sometimes pods, they call them as environments that are self-contained, and they're able for you to basically treat it just as software as a service. And of course, the controls work their way up all the way through the stack. So how do you take advantage of these things? So things like high availability. This is your application, and some of your application requirements help drive where what the CSP offers is the ability to use constructs that are within the CSP for high availability. So for example, you see on the right, there's a load balancer. Well, in many cases, the CSP will deploy two for you. You'll get one as a primary and one as a secondary. So help driving those availability of your environments. There's also the idea around backend servers that when you need to have a server go down, we have health checks to check to see what happened with the service. But it's also on, the onus also becomes on the implementer to have high availability constructs such that there are no single points of failure throughout the entire environment. One of the key areas is looking at these things, and some of the hyperscale concepts that we use as a CSP are things like block storage or object storage or other storage mechanisms that you don't even have to worry about because we take care of that for you behind the scenes. We replicate that within a region. We replicate that cross regions. We replicate those as, in some cases as a global construct throughout the entire infrastructure backbone. Also data sovereignty. So in having data within regions, you can pick where things deploy and where things retain, and so that they stay within region, which is also extremely important. So some fundamental terminology, right? So fault tolerance describes minimal downtime, those things that need to be patched or upgraded. That's a rolling basis. We also deal with fault tolerance around redundancy of storage, network, servers, and compute across the board. As we look at scalability, so scalability defines and works in terms of what's scaling in or scaling out. This is where you can now deploy multiple backend servers and to accommodate what you need for load or your application requirements. And you can do that through automation, right? Auto scaling allows you to deploy more services as you hit a certain threshold. Typically, many CSPs use maybe compute. If you hit have a rule that states when CPU utilization hits 70% or greater, then turn up another server within the pool and now begin to share those resources across. Also for scaling back in, when you hit a threshold of say maybe 30% or 40% of uses, that scales back in for you automatically. It's that scale, it's that automation that is being built into CSP's environments that help you take advantage of these things. And of course, elasticity is quickly deploying and decreasing resources as it needs, as your application requirements dictate. So finally, kind of a concept around CapEx and OpEx. This is where a lot of customers look at the operational model as pay for what I use. From an OpEx perspective, there's great capital expenditure, which has freed up a lot of resources across the cloud computing environment. Cloud was built on the foundation of pay for the resources you use and you only pay for what you consume. It's the onus, though, you got to be very careful, is that it is on the end user to make sure that you are managing those resources appropriately. But it frees up a lot of fixed entity, fixed cost that can now be repurposed, leveraged, and used within the operational model that for cloud and what cloud delivers for you. So in quick summary, we talked a little bit about cloud computing, on-demand network access pooling, how automation is driving these types of solutions across all CSPs, and the various service models we looked at. And my colleague Jonathan will take it from a different, well, I looked at it from automation. Jonathan's going to look at it from the SA&A side of the house. We talked about different concepts within HA, DR, fault tolerance, scalability, elasticity, and then finally CapEx and OpEx. And so with that, I'm going to turn it back to Kelly for any Q&A.
I'm not seeing anything specific on the chat. Is there anybody that has a question? You can either raise your hand, you can put it in the chat. Sorry, has somebody got a question? Hello? I thought I heard somebody trying to raise a question. No, okay. Excellent. Oh, JF?
If I can, Mark?
Yeah, just get a little closer to your microphone, Jeff.
Oh, sorry, I had moved my. There we go. Better.
Yep, that's better.
Obviously, you described the life of a CSP, if you will, and what are the elements that are forming the abilities for the cloud service provider to be very helpful. What are, in your experience, what is the appetite, quote unquote, for a cloud service provider to have its operation evaluated to whatever degree this SA&A is demanding? How difficult is it to get cooperation from a CSP?
So I think from my perspective, and I think Jonathan can maybe hit on that a little bit later, but we try to be flexible in making sure we understand the specific controls. So things like protected B and working with the organizations to understand how do we map into those controls, what can we provide from documentation. We provide a lot of SOC reports. We provide additional operational reports. So we certainly want to be flexible. We've gone through protected B, so it is a lot of work. It's a lot of groups being collectively brought together. There's some foundational things that we leverage. So if there's other controls and other packages that we've done, that helps, I think, drive the adoption, certainly within what the CSP has to provide for the customer.
I like that you mentioned it's a bunch of groups. There's so many people that want this to be a security problem. It's so much not just a security problem. It's about security, but yeah. Thank you. Big time.
Excellent. And we do have a question that came in over the chat from Pete Hillier. He asks, are there any distinct differences in expectations of a CSP over any other outsourced service?
Expectations. I think from my viewpoint, we look to make sure that we can help customers meet their accreditation. Customers need to go live with ATOs, I think, as JF pointed out. So authority to operate, how do we help them either consume some of those controls and then leverage those controls so that maybe they can rapidly be able to ATO applications faster than they normally would have, because the CSP is taking on that requirement. It doesn't mean we're taking on all of them, but we're certainly taking on a significant portion from the infrastructure side. It's then sure the responsibility for everything above that line that you're utilizing, that you need to work towards your information assurance officer or accreditations. I hope that answered the question. I was a little vague on some of the terminology used, but I hope that answered the question.
I'm not hearing otherwise. John Weigelt, any other questions you'd like to raise?
Yeah,
There's
there
a
was
question
one
that-
question
sorry.
about mapping ITSG 33 controls to the cloud service provider documentation.
Yeah, so I think Jonathan might touch on that tomorrow morning, but some of those mapping of controls can occur working closely with your CSP. So working with, in many cases, CSPs have full compliance teams. I know certainly we do have a very large compliance team to work with and understand how do we collectively, jointly map these controls so that we can provide you the assurance. And I think, as JF talked about, that there's always the risk reduction of what controls are being done by us, and are they acceptable as part of your risk framework.
Thanks for that, Mark. And if I could just add, so we will talk about the mapping tomorrow. And one of the things to remember is that the protected B medium is very, very closely aligned with the US FedRAMP moderate. There are maybe a dozen controls that are different. So if you ask your cloud provider or you go to their web pages, there's a difference in how people provide the system security plans for their services. That describes in glorious detail all the different controls that they put in place. It's good late night reading.
Yes, it is.
And
there's
in
a hand
fact,
up, I see. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
There's back in the early days of ITSG 33, Trend Micro was the first organization that took their set of products, everything that they offer, and they identify which control they support or which control they meet in the overall catalog. If you're a service provider out there or a vendor out there, that's what you got to do. For us to be able to select what it is and the best case, and having a what Michael Daisley put it out there, a mapping of what each service supports or provides would be phenomenal, just off of the website.
Mm-hmm. It would.
Jeff. Sergey, your hands up.
Yeah, actually, maybe I'm jumping ahead, but it would be very good to hear about the control class, like vulnerability assessment, because for cloud, it's pretty gray area whose responsibility normally is, whether it's tenant responsibility in case of IaaS implementation, or it's a cloud responsibility. So do you have any standard approaches and frameworks for things like common look and feel, scanning of particular ports, etc.? Is it in general allowed, or cloud provider takes it as its own responsibility?
Yeah, I'll comment. So I think, depending on the cloud service provider, there are things that they will allow you to do, like pen testing. That's usually something that usually comes up as customers look to ATO their application. That's usually a big one, and that's based on your cloud service provider. So as that kind of an example of what you begin to, as you look at rolling out your application, what you need to do.
Yeah, and based on SLA, certainly. Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Excellent.
There's some cloud providers also publish their penetration test results internally, so they may have a security team that's continuously looking at their environment, as well as getting third-party independent pen testers, and they'll publish those reports as well. So you can use that in addition to your own vulnerability assessments, let's call it. And there are a number of providers as well that provide bug bounty programs and have quite healthy rewards should you find something untoward.
Okay, so in fact, we can use those programs just to scan our own application, just to make sure it complies with
100%.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Excellent. Any other questions, John?
I don't see any. There is a comment on the vulnerability assessment reports suggesting that they are closely held by individual organizations. When you look at the SOC 2 reports, they often have a appendix or something near the back of them where there's observations in the report that have been addressed by the organization. So that's where you might see in some organizations. I know for ours, we publish them, but I agree that results may vary.
Very true. Okay. Mark, thank you very much. JF and Mark, thank you very much. And once again, thank you to our sponsor, John at Microsoft. Great start to our 3-day sessions. Tomorrow, we're going to be talking about compliance within the cloud, responsibility. Somebody raised some questions around that today. So yes, Jonathan will be addressing some of that tomorrow. We've also got Joe Cummings and John Weigelt talking to us more about the SANA regulatory impacts and, again, responsibilities within the Hyperscale cloud. And then day 3, which is Thursday, we've got 3 actual practitioners from CMHC, TBS, and ESDC who are going to be talking to us about what they've done, what's worked, what didn't work, and those journeys. So just in closing, one of the advantages to being a corporate member of AFCEA is that you get to participate at the in these awesome events. So if you have any further questions after this week, this day, I encourage you to reach out to one of these companies. Many of them you heard from today, some more you'll be hearing from tomorrow. And everybody have a fabulous day, and hopefully we'll see many of you again tomorrow. Thank you.
Absolutely. And just a reminder that we're recording these sessions so that you can share them with your community as well.
We will send those out to everybody who's registered for today and the subsequent days as well. Thanks, John.
Thank you very much.
Lovely. Thanks a lot, folks.
Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Thank you. Cheers.
Bye.
Thank you.
Cheers.